What is the model minority? The term model minority was coined in 1966, partially as a response to the civil rights movement. Although Asian Americans were marginalized and faced social issues at the time, many generally lacked political activism against racism. Their educational levels equaled that of white people and gained success in their segregated communities in the 1960s. As a result, racist white America cited the success of Asian Americans to disprove racism and argue that African Americans should focus on education instead of actually confronting the institutional racism and racial segregation of the time period. The model minority myth is based in stereotypes and perpetuates a false narrative in which Asian Americans are perceived as particularly successful across academic, economic, and cultural spheres. It instills the assumption that all Asian Americans are hardworking, well-educated, and upper middle class. However, the model minority myth overlooks the economic realities of different Asian American groups. While simple statistics may show that Asian Americans have higher medium educational levels and lower unemployment rates than those of non-Asian Americans, these measurements are deceptive and hide the variation in the economic status of Asians in the U.S. While roughly 3 in 4 Taiwanese and Asian Indians have at least a bachelor's degree, less than 1 in 5 Cambodians and Laotians have a bachelor's degree or higher. In a way, the model minority myth is marginalizing Southeast Asians and Pacific Islanders. When examining the income data, we must consider the fact that over half of Asian Americans live in just 5 states: California, New York, Hawaii, New Jersey, and Washington. These states comparatively have a higher income and higher cost of living. Therefore, these Asian American populations will have a higher median income compared to other minority groups who are more geographically dispersed across the country. The overall data also masks the economic status of Asian Americans living in major U.S. cities. A report from the New York City Center for Economic Opportunity estimated that 26.6% of Asian Americans lived below New York City's poverty line in 2014. Asian American Federation also noted that almost 1 in 4 Asian American seniors live in poverty. So, how does the model minority myth perpetuate anti-Blackness? The model minority myth creates a culture among Asian Americans that is contingent upon success. It preaches individualism and attaining achievements in fields of higher education. These quote-unquote positive stereotypes of Asian Americans growing up to become doctors, engineers, lawyers, and members of the elite upper class are deeply flawed, and as a result, deeply divisive. The narrative that the model minority myth portrays is simple. If Asian Americans are able to achieve success, why can't Black people and other racial minorities do the same? However, in reality, Asian Americans are still subject to racism, despite the white majority's attempts to say otherwise. This success that Asian Americans have is actually tokenized. Many Asian Americans do experience poverty, a lack of education, and financial instability in the U.S. But in the eyes of society, such struggles are practically non-existent. This drives a racial wedge and perpetuates the anti-Blackness experienced in the Asian community today. Black Americans have been faulted for their inability to overcome their own struggles because they lack hard work or strong family values, but this narrative really overlooks the systemic racism that Black people have faced, as well as centuries of enslavement. This perception disregards the decades of discrimination Black people have experienced through Jim Crow laws, segregation, redlining, mass incarceration, police brutality, and so much more. Ultimately, the model minority myth fails to recognize that the current system is built for Black people to fail, and while success may be attributed to some Asian Americans, it isn't given to all. So, how can you be an ally? As Asian Americans, we need to stand alongside the Black community to help fight against a system that favors the white majority. We need to recognize our own inherent privileges as Asian Americans and that we haven't experienced the extreme, systematic dehumanization of slavery that Black people have. We need to address our implicit biases and actively participate in educating our families, friends, and peers. We need to amplify the voices of Black, Indigenous, and people of color by signing petitions, donating to fundraisers, and joining campaigns. Dear Asian Youth has partnered with Diversify Our Narrative, a campaign to bring diverse, anti-racist texts to California public high schools, and you can sign their petition here. As a community, we need to be an active ally towards the Black community and show that we stand in solidarity against a systemic racism that impacts all people of color.